Without a doubt, there's no swordsmith that inspires more excitement and passion with Japanese sword collectors than the name Masamune. Masamune is universally known, even for those that are not deeply involved in studying the history of the Japanese sword craft. And from all Japanese swords produced, there's probably no better known sword that produces more excitement and passion than the Honjō Masamune. The Honjo Masamune is a missing national treasure. It has been missing since the end of the war, and it is a sword that people have devoted their lives to studying, trying to find, looking for clues. It has been a global treasure hunt for decades. So to give a little bit of background on the Masamune and separate legend from fact, I'm going to talk a little bit about Masamune himself first. Masamune was the best-known swordsmith from the Soshu tradition, the Soshu school, based in Kamakura. He did not found the school. The school was founded by Shintoku Kunimitsu, a student that originated in the lineage from Kyoto. However, Shintoku Kunimitsu himself worked in the Kamakura, and he founded the tradition, the Soshu tradition there, with a number of famous disciples, and that included Norishige, Go Yoshihiro, Yukimitsu, and Masamune, of course, as well. And Masamune himself had a number of famous students. They say legend is that there are 10 famous students of Masamune, the Masamune Jutetsu. But he himself was known and was considered to be influential for the style of work that he produced. He produced work that resembled kohoki, very flamboyant, elaborate, crystalline activity, nie activity, full of various activities like kintsugi, sunagashi, inazuma, chikei, all throughout the blade. Composite of Jackson Pollock of activity throughout the surface of the sword. And that style of work was influential itself across Japan. So after Masamune developed this particular style of work in the early 1300s, you can see that influence spread throughout Japan. And that may have been from his direct students or individuals that saw his work and wanted to have similar workmanship in their swords. Examples of that are the Soden Bizen school that was spearheaded by Embody Kanimitsu in the middle Nambokucho period, is a style of work that is Bizen Den, so it reflects the workmanship of Bizen and Bizen steel, but with the influence of this rich nie-based activity as well in the style of Kanimitsu himself and his student. People seem to have the expectation that Masamune blades were large, robust pieces, like the example that we're seeing here. This is not a Masamune. It's not the Honjo Masamune, but it's a sword that comes from one of the descendants of his school. Masamune worked in generally the late Kamakura period, and his blades reflect that style, that tachi sugata, that's typical for the time period. There are a couple of pieces that are attributed to Masamune that are more of what we think of as the classic Nambokucho shape, with a large point, large kasaki, and wide mihaba, so wide with large point. They're in the rarity. So most of the blades attributed to Masamune are more classic late Kamakura tachi in their work style, and of course he produced a number of tanto as well. So due to the rarity of signed examples from Masamune, there have been theories in the past that he didn't exist, that it is simply a category or a bucket that you can use to attribute great Soshu blades. But there are signed Masamune. There are very few. There are a handful, 4 or 5 signed tanto, and there is one saiha or retempered signed tachi by Masamune that are considered to be authentic examples of his inscription. Why are there so few signed Masamune? Well, it may be that because of the fact that he was working for the Kamakura Bakufu, that it was not appropriate for him to put his name on those swords. But again, there are examples of his inscription. The swords that we have that are signed Masamune are generally in a nijime or 2-character inscription of Masamune, with the exception of one, which I believe is the Daikoku Masamune, which is signed with a 3-character inscription of Masamune Saku made by Masamune. And that rarity of assigned examples goes beyond Masamune to his son. His son Sadamune, considered to be the direct inheritor of the mainline Soshu tradition after Masamune. There are no remaining signed examples of his works today at all. There were in the past. We can see them in old Oshigata book, but there are none remaining to us today. We know, looking at sword books that were made in the generation after Masamune, so the end of the Nabokucho period, early Muromachi period, that he was a famous individual during his lifetime. But it became even more so, his fame, the desirability of Soshu blades during the time of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. So going to the end of Koto times, going to the Momoyama period, Toyotomi Hideyoshi loved Soshu blades, and he loved Masamune. And a sword book that was compiled shortly after, called the Kyoho Meibutsu Cho, which is a documented listing of the most famous swords in Japan, have a large number of Soshu blades in them. From Masamune himself, there are something like 39 blades remaining to us today that were attributed to Masamune, along with swords of Sadamune and Hiromitsu and others from the early Soshu school. As far as what we know about the Honjo Masamune itself, the Honjo Masamune was a blade that received its name from the previous owner, Honjo Ichizen Okami Shigenaga. Shigenaga was one of the generals that was serving under Uesugi Kenshin and Uesugi Kagekatsu. So one day after one of the Uesugi campaigns, he was sitting on his bench on the edge of the battlefield, and he was approached by another individual, Tozenji Umanosuke. This intended assassin was approaching Shigenaga with the intention of showing him some heads that were captured in battle, with the intention that he was going to assassinate Shigenaga. He attacked. He cut deeply into Shigenaga's helmet, but Shigenaga was able to overcome his assassin and win that fight and take the blade for himself. And after examining the blade, which was the now known as Honjo Masamune Tachi, the blade was a very, very long daito, and it had a number of chips in it from use in battle and from the fact that it did sustain damage cutting into Shigenaga's helmet. But that sword came to Honjo Ichizen Okami Shigenaga at that time. At that point, eventually, it went into the hands of Toyotomi Hideyoshi and finally into the hands of the future shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu. And at that point, it became a part of the shogunate lineage. Once the Honjo Masamune came to Tokugawa Ieyasu, it became a symbol of the shogunate. So after Ieyasu, it was passed to Tokugawa Yorinobu, and from there it went from shogun to shogun throughout the lineage, and more than just simply being a sword, a famous sword, it represented the handover from one shogun to the next. Getting into the description a bit more, we know that the blade was a typical shinogi zukuri katana blade, yoimune, so the back of the blade had two sides to it, a single peak, not a mitsumune like what you see in this tamatsugu here. We know that the blade had a thin kasane, so it was very thin, it had a wide mihaba, very wide, and overall had classic Soshu Den characteristics in the workmanship itself. It did have a mounting. It may or may not remain with its mounting if the blade is still in existence today. The mounting was a classic Momoyama style of uchikatana koshirai. So you have the black same, the race skin is lacquered in black. The wrapping on the handle was in indigo blue leather, which is kind of typical for Momoyama period mountings or Tensho mountings. So very typical mounting for the time period. There were 3 kirimon, or Polonia crests, on each of the menuki, and there was a kosugan kogai with kirimon, which were also Polonia crests in gold on the mounting. So very typical of what you would see for a mounting of koshirai from that time period. Eventually, the Honjo Masamune was designated a national treasure in Japan, and that happened May 29th, 1939. Later, all of the former national treasures were reclassified as Juyobunkazai, and that would be the categorization that it has today. So it's a pre-war kokuho, or Juyobunkazai, meaning an important cultural property of Japan. We know, as far as the description of the blade itself, that the blade is currently 65.2 centimeters in length. It originally was longer at the time that Shigenaga won it in battle, but it has been shortened. I often will receive communications from people who believe they found the Honjo Masamune, and they try to validate this by showing me that there's an inscription of Masamune on the nakago, or tang of the sword. The Honjo Masamune is known to be an unsigned blade. We don't have photos, but we have oshigata, drawings of the blade. We have detailed descriptions from time after time when it was examined before it became lost. And it is known today that the sword was shortened, and the inscription that may have been there originally is gone, but we know the details of it by the description of the blade and of its mounting. So something else I'd like to get into is the Honjo Masamune is the most famous of the missing swords. There's no argument about that. However, because of its fame, people will also refer to it as being the best sword in existence. Not only is it the most important, the most famous, the most sought after missing sword, but it's referred to being the best sword anywhere. We know that's not true because various sword experts had a chance to study it in person before it was lost. So Imamura Choga was one of those individuals. Dr. Homajonji also had a chance to examine the blade. They weren't deeply impressed with the workmanship. It clearly was a Soshu blade. They commented that it was possible that other attributions could be considered beyond Masamune, like Shizu, his immediate student. So not breathtaking, but still there's no discounting the importance of the blade in the history of Japan, considering its connection to the shogunate and the succession, and the role that it played in that process. So now we start getting down closer to the present day. What we know is that after having been within the shogunate and then being an imperial possession, the Honjo Masamune became lost at the end of the war. So at the end of World War II, blades were turned in to the police stations as a part of the handover of swords. And we know that the Honjo Masamune was turned in on January 18th, 1946. And that was handed over by Tokugawa Ieyasu, who was responsible for bringing the family blades, handing them over at that time. There's a lot of legend associated with the handover process, and a lot of scrutiny also is put on the note by the sergeant who signed for the Honjo Masamune. It was written katakana, but one reading of that phonetically is Kodi Bimor. We don't really know in detail clearly who that individual was and the disposition of the blade after it was turned in. So considering everything that we know about the Honjo Masamune, the fact that it may or may not be a Masamune, it may be simply an early but still important Soshu blade from that time, if the blade survived and it was polished again, it may not be recognizable today as a Masamune. Lengths can change slightly, the appearance of blades can change while it's being polished. Certainly many blades were put through an amateur restoration process since the war or received various types of abuse. So we don't know if the Honjo Masamune has already surfaced, if it has been damaged, or if it has gone back to Japan and been reattributed under a different attribution. However, my hope is that the Honjo Masamune has survived and remains in good condition, whether it is something that we see surface out of a collection where it's been preserved or simply has been rediscovered. I do hope that we all have an opportunity to see the Honjo Masamune again. Thank you.